Welcome, everybody. My name is Heather Perry. I'm the Superintendent of Schools here in Gorham. This is video number 2 of our series around understanding public schools. And the focus of today's conversation is going to be about school governance. So basically, how are schools governed, how are decisions made, and that sort of thing. So here with me is a special guest who has some really great experience in school governance as well, Kathy Gerard. Kathy has been on the school committee before here in Gorham, but Kathy's also a wonderful business partner in the area and has many years of experience working in Gorham. But Kathy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Heather, very much for this opportunity. I'm honored to be here and talk a little bit about schools. My name is Kathy Gerard. My husband and I have lived here in Gorham for over 30 years. We moved here with a young and growing family, and to be honest, didn't really do a ton of research about the school system. We heard it was maybe good, and we were pleasantly surprised when we came. And of course, our kids started public school, and it's an excellent school system. It was then, and it continues to be now. So, had a very positive experience with the Gorham Public Schools. In 2008, I had the honor of being elected to a 3-year term on the school committee. And after I served that term, I was asked about a year or so later to also fill in a remaining 1-year term of somebody who had left. So in total, I served 4 years on the Gorham School Committee. Again, it was many years ago at this point, but I look back on that time very fondly. I learned a lot about how public schools operate, and it was certainly a positive experience.
Well, there's nothing like serving on the school committee to really find out how public schools operate and how decisions are made. I mean, that kind of really dives in pretty deeply and the experience. And the good news is that even since 2008, it hasn't changed considerably since then as to how public schools are operated. So I think that's ample experience. Now, before we move on to the governance thing, I do have to ask about your children and where they are in their careers now since graduating from the Gorham Public Schools, because I'm quite curious how well they did.
Well, they went from the Gorham Public Schools to a post-secondary education. They all obtained 4-year degrees.
Nice.
And are working professionally, 1 in Philadelphia and 2 right here in Maine.
And they're happy?
Very happy.
Then our mission vision has successfully been completed. Thank you so much, Kathy. That's great.
They are productive members of society, fortunately.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk a little bit about governance. And I know you brought some questions to ask, and maybe we could start off with one of those and then see where we wander from there. All right.
In the 15 years or so since I was involved in the public schools, society has changed a little bit, and schools have to evolve. One thing that stays the same is the way schools are governed. And maybe you could speak a little bit as to how they are governed, what laws are in place, and how that translates into how the schools function.
Yeah, certainly. So the law that specifically talks about, in Maine anyway, that talks about school governance is Title 20A, Chapter 101, is where you could really look at school. Now, in that chapter, though, they refer to school boards. Now, in the state law, when you see school boards, it's the same as school committee, even though there is a slight difference in governance structure between those. In the state of Maine, we actually have lots of different governance structures for public schools. We in Gorham are a department structure, so we're a municipal school system, whereas a district like RSU 14 is a regional school system, which is a slightly different governance structure. And there are even school unions in the state, and then there are AOSs in the state. And then there's even this one other wonderful one called a CSD in the state of Maine. All of them are similar they're different in some key ways, but the similar part of them is that you have to be elected to be a school board or a school committee member. And so in order to be a school board member, you have to be elected. And once you're elected, then you are elected typically to a 3-year term. in the macro sense of things, schools sit underneath of the state of Maine. And when you think about the federal government and their role in public schools, they actually have none. So by the Constitution, the federal government really doesn't have anything to do with governance of schools at the local level. That's all distributed to the states. And so then each state operates its own public schools. Now, again, there's lots of variances across the country. In Maine, we have a very highly local control state.
Right.
Like, your local school boards govern your schools for the most part. There's some state regulations and other things that do have a say, but decisions are typically made at that local level. Whereas you could get into some communities that are county-based for school system governance. So it can be very different because each state does it a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, the governance is primarily the same in that they're elected officials. Their primary role and responsibility are twofold. One is to hire a superintendent, who then is the person that ensures that the schools are operated on a daily basis. And then the second really is to govern through policy and create policy, which is, it's like, you know, I think back to, in fact, I was just in one of the fifth grades just earlier today, and they were having a little mini lesson on the branches of government, right? And so when you think about schools, you could almost look at it as like a micro version of that, where the school committee is the legislative body. They make the policies or what laws, right? And then my role as a superintendent is more of an executive role. It is to carry those out. And so the school committee primarily governs through the creation of its policies, which then tell me, as the executive person, what to do and how to govern, how to operate the schools on a daily basis. And, you know, that's kind of the biggest pieces or how things are governed. The school committee is, as a whole, my boss. Individually, they're not. Individually, they're just ordinary citizens. But when they meet in a publicly posted meeting, then they have the authority of the school committee, and that school committee is my boss. And so that's sort of how it operates underneath there. Did that answer your question?
It did.
Okay.
It did.
You have any follow-up?
You mentioned school committee members obviously are elected by the voters.
Yeah.
What requirements, what qualifications must a person have to run for a school committee?
Yeah. Well, I mean, legally speaking, they have to be 18 or older, and of sound mind and body. Really, I mean, they just have to be 18 or older and a citizen of a community. Now, you would run for a school committee in the area that you reside. You couldn't run for a school committee that's not where you reside. So if you work in another community, you couldn't. It has to be in the community that you reside. But other than that, you just have to be 18 or older and be elected. Yeah.
So that's one, of course, you know, the official qualifications.
Oh, yes.
But then, obviously, when you have a board of 7 people working together, then I think it becomes apparent that there are certain skills and characteristics maybe that would be helpful in that role. So what have you found over the years that makes a high-functioning school committee member?
Well, it's unique that I'm answering this question because they are my boss, keep in mind. So this is almost like sort of saying what a good bosses look like. I'll be gentle, all right. But I mean, the first thing is that kind of trying to keep things at a macro level, understanding that the role of the committee is to create policy and to govern through policy and through the superintendent. So you're not the day-to-day operations of the schools. And so that's hard sometimes because a lot of times they'll get interested in serving on a school committee for lots of different reasons. You know, maybe they see something that they'd like to have changed, or maybe they see something that's really going well and they just want to strengthen that. So oftentimes people will be elected or they'll run and then become elected school officials because they have a particular thing that they're interested in. But when you get into the role, you've got to have that really global mindset about here's the big picture stuff and how the whole school operates, not just this one little aspect of it. There is a lot. Well, you probably remember from your time on the school committee how big things are, right? Yeah, it's not just any one school or one class or one grade. Right. There's a whole system. And what I think so many people too don't understand is that, you know, the roles and responsibilities that are within a school. You have teachers, you have ed techs, you've got school nutrition, you've got transportation, you've got school nurses. I mean, you've got psychologists. It's a microcosm of almost an entire, you know, town by itself. But the things that you're looking for skills are that skill to really keep at that macro level, to see the big picture, collaborate with one another. because it's not a one-person show. The school committee or a school board there's 7 or however many elected officials are there. They have to work together as one, and that's an important part too, is to be able to collaborate, listen, share your thoughts and your perspectives, back up your thoughts and your perspectives, and listen and make decisions based on what you think is in the best interest of children at the time, whatever that is. And it may change 2 years down the road after that decision is made, but if you're making decisions in the best interest, what you think is the best interest of children, then you'll be fine every time.
Yes.
And so those are 2 big ones. That ability to listen is not, I mean, that's a big one. And then I would say really just an ability to articulate your beliefs. Once you've formed an opinion, it's important for you to share that with the public so they can understand why you're making a particular decision. And I think that you need to be able to articulate that as well. That's a pretty important skill. But so if I'm going to highlight, then I'd say that big macro vision level thought process, collaboration, ability to listen, and ability to articulate your thoughts clearly.
Yes.
Those would be some of the ones. Would you have any that you experienced that you'd add?
No, I think ability to listen is probably highly important. As you were speaking, I had a recollection of one of the first votes I had to take as a school committee member. Was a very controversial issue, and I was the only dissenting voice.
Courage is another good skill, then I would say. Yes.
But you know, as typical, we would hope the discussion was very honest and respectful, and everybody, of course, took the time to state their opinion, why they thought that way, and then, of course, why they were voting the way they were voting.
Yeah.
So it was a good lesson.
Yep.
And I think that may have been the only time I was the sole dissenting vote on something.
Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, I'm sure the sort of the ethics or the sort of unwritten rules, actually, that we have a handbook for our school committee members. I believe you helped to create it when you were in as a school committee member.
Did.
But anyway, that handbook talks around, you need to be courageous and make decisions based on what you think is best. And then the thing is that once that decision is made by the majority of the school committee,
Very
we're moving on.
important. Yes.
Moving on together,
Yes.
regardless of what that outcome. Whether
Exactly.
agreed to you individually or not, the decision was made by the group, and then we're
Yes.
moving on to the next thing.
Absolutely. Once a decision is made, the committee as a whole supports that decision.
Right. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Good.
What are some of the duties? You mentioned policies.
Policy is a big one. I would say the other one is the hiring and the evaluation of the superintendent. Because again, it's important that the school committee members understand that their role is at that macro policy level. Their role is to create the policies, and then it's mine to sort of operate the schools on a daily basis. And so, but they hire me, so they're my boss. So they're one of the big jobs other than policy is to hire the superintendent and to evaluate the superintendent and provide feedback on an annual basis to the superintendent, what's going well, what isn't. And it's quite a process. People don't understand. I mean, what we take a lot of time to do that here in Gorham anyway. I think it's a very robust process where each year it starts with me developing goals for the year, sharing them with the school committee. They even vote on my goals every year to make sure that we're on the same page and to try to formalize them. So I have basically marching orders for the year. And then at the end of the year, there's an evaluation that is a 360 evaluation that includes parents, staff members, school committee members, community members, anybody that will participate in the survey, basically. And they use all that data to identify areas of strength, areas of challenge, and then that's sort of forms the basis of the next year's goals, is sort of how does that work. And I think that's a really great process. It's an open and transparent process, and it's a positive one because that is what gives me sort of the detail of the vision of what they want me to do. Is during those conversations I really have a very clear understanding of where they want to go and why, and that really helps me to guide the next year's work moving forward. And so it's that constant, and it's not just once a year, it's constant communication, but that's a big piece as well. And then above and beyond that, I mean, the school board, I'm sure you spent much time with budget, like many of our current school committee members do.
It's a long, arduous process.
It is. Again, I think, it's people sometimes forget that for us as a school, it starts in October of the previous year. The school committee gets it right around February,
Yep.
and then they spend a whole month and a half with it until April, usually is when the school committee votes on a proposed budget. But then it has to go to the town council, and the school committee shepherds that budget to the town council, and then that goes to the referendum in June. And so it's a pretty long process. But budget, development of budget, oversight of finances, that's another big piece of the responsibility of school committee members. Again, I do the day-to-day stuff, but it's important for them to sort of have this big picture level understanding of what's going on so that they know it's in alignment with the mission and vision and the other things that they control. And so mission vision is part of policy, so that's there. Hiring a superintendent, finances. Boy, between those three, I think you got most of the stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that keeps the
That'll
group
keep you
busy.
busy. Yeah,
It does,
yeah.
it does.
Yeah.
How does the school committee, they don't operate in a vacuum, they have
No.
public meetings. How else, besides public meetings, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how the public attends those meetings and contributes to those meetings, but how
Sure.
else does
Yeah.
the school committee engage with the public, parents, community members, town council members,
Yeah.
anybody in the community that's
Yeah.
interested in the business of the school committee?
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, so let's see. There are the public meetings, and the public meetings, we have 2 per month. Typically, it's the what's the second Wednesday now. You got me on that one. I think it's the second Wednesday
is.
of each month is the regular. We call them regular meetings. Those are the ones that take place in the council chambers downstairs. They're live streamed by Georgia and her wonderful team and recorded, and you can find those on the town's website. There's also the workshop meetings that we have. That's usually the 4th Wednesday of each month. The workshop meetings take place upstairs in our conference room. Now, that has the ability to live stream and record now, so we are doing that even now with the workshop meetings. They're live streamed and recorded.
Excellent.
If folks want to watch that, they can. If you want to, as a member of the public, come in and talk with school committee members, there's a public comment on every single agenda. And it's, I don't know, sometimes the town says that you can only talk on things that aren't on the agenda because they have public hearing. Their structure is a little bit different. But for us, on our public comment on every single agenda, there is a public comment, and you can comment on anything, whether it's on the agenda or not on the agenda. Because that's your time to talk. Once that time is up, then the school committee moves on to conduct its business, and there may not be an opportunity, although there still is sometimes an opportunity for public to engage during that time. It's a little more closed down just because they need to get to their business at that point in time. But public comment is a big, big thing. And I know I've heard some folks say that, I can't get out to the meetings, or I'm working nights or whatever, and that's very true, and that's a real thing. But you can also submit written comments. They're not read during the meeting, but every school committee member reads them. So if you email the school committee, either one member or all of them, they read every single one, and there will be a response by the board chair. So email is another way to share your thinking and thoughts with school committee members. Another way that the school committee engages with the public is sometimes they'll have public forums on particular topics. Like we have a couple of forums coming up on the code of conduct. One's actually tonight, and the other one is the 26th. I think that's another document you're familiar with, Kathy. But that lasted for 20 years, Kathy.
I can't believe
And
it's been 20 years.
It's robust still in 20 years. And so our goal is to take that document, not mess with it too much.
Okay, that's
just because it's
reassuring.
really good. I just trying to tweak it to make it last another 20 years.
Yes.
So that's the goal. But anyway, so off on that one. But they engage through public forums in various ways. Also, the school committee attends PI meetings once a year. They'll go out to the PI meetings, which are the parents in education, that take place at each school, and they'll visit. And then also there are things that they do sort of behind the scenes, like, for example, people may not know that the chair meets every month with the chair of the town council, every single month on the last Monday of the month. And myself and the town manager are also present during those meetings, and so every month we touch base that way. Also, the school committee chair attends each town council meeting and provides a report to the town council in public on camera during that time as well. And so those are some of the formal ways. And then, some of the business that's conducted by the school committee is done in committee. So we have 3 standing committees. One is the funding and facilities The second one is policy, that's quite a big, as you might imagine, big committee. And then the third standing committee is personnel. And they often deal with things like negotiations and different things that we have. So, but there's a lot of ability to engage. And of course, they're locally elected individuals too. So you might see them in Hannaford, or you might see them at, picking up the mail at the post office or something like that. And there's always opportunities to engage with folks too during that time, as well. So,
are workshops open to the public?
They're absolutely open to the public to attend. They're absolutely open to the public to participate in during public comment. But then after that public comment, there probably not going to be any interactions. It's more of you would view what's happening, but there wouldn't be much of an opportunity to talk.
Oh, so there is a public comment
Every
period
single
at the workshop.
which is different from when you were on the committee.
Yes.
Because when you were on the committee, I think it was only at the regular meetings
That's
that there
correct.
was public comment. The workshop didn't have any.
That's correct.
Statute changed about 3 years ago in Maine that requires for every publicly posted committee meeting, there's public comment.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Yep,
So
good
that even
opportunity.
adds to transparency.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about the subcommittees you mentioned? Are those meetings open to the public?
Those are open to the public to attend. There's not a public comment on those because those are not full meetings of the committee. They're work sessions, really. But they are open for members of the public to attend if you want to listen in to understand what they're talking about or different things. The agendas are all posted online, so you can see what those agendas are, and you can follow the minutes of those meetings as well on our website. But there wouldn't be any engagement typically in those groups unless the committee called in people from the public to talk about specific things and areas of expertise. Yeah.
Right, very helpful.
Yeah.
You mentioned, of course, a very important function of the school committee is related to creating and getting a budget approved.
Yes.
So the schools can operate.
Yep.
What other duties does the school committee have, maybe as far as curriculum or personnel? Can you speak to those two things a little bit?
So, I mean, the school committee has the final authority with curriculum. Typically, that's done either through the budgetary process, though, so it's not like we don't have a separate committee that's just curriculum. We have a teaching and learning committee that's a little bit like that, but it's not the same as curriculum. So, oftentimes what happens, though, is that the curriculum, a lot of the work for movement of curriculum or adjustments to curriculum is done through staff committees, and it's brought to that level by me, and adjustments are made that would be seen in the budgetary process, and therefore then they would have an ability to weigh in as a committee through the budgetary process. For example, purchase of new textbooks, or if we're going to shift from one type of textbook to another. Like just a few years ago, we shifted from everyday math to reveal math. And that was a conversation that definitely involved the school committee, and they ultimately had the final say with the budget process because they had to approve the funding that would go along with that. And so ultimately they have the final say with curriculum, but a lot of the work is done underneath and is brought to them through that budgetary process. Yeah. So that's one big one. What was the other one? Let's
Personnel.
see. Oh, personnel, yes. The big one there that the school committee engages is negotiations. That's huge. Like, they spend a lot of time with that. We have 3 bargaining units here in the Gorham schools, one for the teachers, one what we call MBCC, which is maintenance and bus drivers and custodians and cooks. And then the third one is what we call SAA, which is our secretaries, administrative assistants, and educational technicians. Those are 3 different bargaining units that are fully, labor contracts, the whole 9 yards. We have to go through a pretty robust process to approve contracts. Typically, we do that every 3 years. Sometimes it could be earlier, depending on the situation. But they spend a lot of time with that, and that is the school committee's specific authority to do that. Other than that, though, they have to approve. Like, there's a whole process with nomination of teachers. Do you remember this?
I do remember.
Yeah.
Yes, we get a list to approve.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you can't create the list. Like,
Correct.
The only way you get the list is for me to nominate the teachers for the list. Then you approve the nomination, and then I issue contracts.
That's correct.
And
yes.
all 3 of those steps have to be followed in order for somebody to be employed. So it has to go first, me nominating; second, school committee approve; third, me issuing contract, and then they're finally hired in a professional position. So that's a big piece. And then I would also say, the other thing to understand is that, again, it gets to that large-scale role, and then my role is a daily operations. And so other than those nomination pieces and probationary contracts, they really don't have a lot of day-to-day work with employees, because then that becomes more my role as an operations person to make sure it's run well. Yep.
Are there any personnel issues that would rise to the level of the school committee?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, like if we had to dismiss somebody,
Right.
that would definitely come to the school committee. Because the school committee in that situation, they almost form like a jury kind of situation, where, you know, I'm bringing forward somebody that needs to be dismissed for whatever reason. It doesn't happen often, folks, just so you know. Okay, but it is a process that does exist, and in those circumstances, the school committee forms like a jury kind of thing, and they have to make the ultimate decision whether or not to terminate a contract or not.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. We've talked a lot about the function of the school committee and the role of the school committee.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to add that we haven't touched upon? I think it's been
I
a
think
pretty
we've wandered
thorough
pretty well.
discussion.
Yeah, I think so. You know, and it's really, well, I think I want to add this piece. How's this? They're elected officials. They're not paid. I mean, there's a very small stipend that's associated with their participation on the school committee. It might be just a little bit higher than when it was in 2008 when you served, but it's not. It doesn't cover the hourly time. And if somebody comes up to you and says, do you want to run for the school committee? It's just 2 meetings a month. They're lying. They're lying 100%. It is, there's more than 2 meetings a month.
It
There's
is.
2 formal meetings, and then you've got subcommittees.
Yes.
And then, you know.
Ad hoc meetings.
Ad hoc meetings. Well, and then here's kind of a negative piece that's also only the role of the school committee can do. And it's not personnel related. It's student related.
Yes.
And this is the worst meetings that you would ever have.
They are.
They're called expulsion hearings. And that is,
Very difficult.
Those are very difficult. Again, we don't have many of them. We really don't. But when they occur, that sucks a lot of time and a lot of emotional energy
Yep.
from the school committee to go through that process. So that's another one, I guess, that we forgot in the conversation.
That's good to bring up.
Yeah.
Well, let's switch a little bit to your role.
My role.
As the chief administrator, maybe
COO kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe in the the CEO, right, in the business world. Typically, the person at the top is the chief executive officer,
Right.
who answers sometimes to nobody,
Right.
depending
not
on
the
the
case
size
here.
of the company, or to a board.
Yes.
In the private sector often,
Yep.
or public companies. So tell us about your role, your responsibilities.
Oh.
If you're feeling like it, maybe a typical day, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, there's not a typical day, but that's why I love my job.
I
just
knew
so
that
you know.
would be
I mean,
the
I
answer.
love that. But so yeah, I mean, in my role, it is kind of like a CEO. Only I definitely have a board to report to, and that's the
Yes.
school committee. And so I do spend a lot of time working on agendas for the school committee meeting, working with the school committee chair to ensure that the agendas are where they want to be, that the right topics are being discussed at the right times, that we're slowly kind of linking everything to our mission and vision and strategic plan, and that the budget is in alignment, and all those kinds of things and conversations are happening behind the scenes with myself and either the school committee as a whole or the school committee chair that I work more closely with on a day in and day out basis. So that's a lot of work there just with that piece. But then when you talk about the operations, the daily operations of the school system, that's not a small thing. You know, there are 5 schools. When you talk about bodies, like people, there are 700 employees in this school system. Now, that's not FTEs. FTEs is closer to just under 400, but there are 700 different people that could go in 700 different ways, and you know, working through the process that we have here in the schools and the organizational structure that we have, trying to ensure that they're all rowing in the same direction and going in that way. So that's a piece of the job, right? Also, you know, there are 2,800 plus, almost 2,900 now students in grades pre-K to 12, and making sure that they are getting everything that they need to get from our schools, and you know, just ensuring that that's taking place. And along with those 2,800 plus students comes about, you know, double that, give or take, parents. That also is my role to sort of communicate with. Now, the good news is that I have an incredible team underneath of me that is just awesome. Building principals, assistant principals. I have some really incredible program directors. Gorham is blessed with really strong leadership at those levels, not including mine, but at those levels, really strong leadership, and just really great staff. And that makes my job a lot easier, because they really know how to do all those things, and I'm kind of just dealing with the small stuff that might need a little bit of assistance. But other than that, they've got it under control on the day in, day out basis. But my job is to oversee all that and make sure that that's all happening, that, you know, the buses start every morning, they get out there, they get the kids, they deliver them to school every morning, they come back and they get them again at the end of the day, and they get them home safely.
That's key.
That home safely is a big key.
Yes.
And that during the course of their day with us, that they're safe, that they're secure, that they feel welcomed, and that they're getting the education that they need to meet our mission and vision and prepare our kids for their future success. And so, you know, that's all mine. And that's done, though, through cooperation with the school committee, because the school committee sets the vision. The school committee sets it's almost like they create the football field and we're playing on it. And that's exactly how it works. And so I do stay busy. It's a different day every day. You know, some days I'll start off, you know, I typically will start off at 7:15 in the morning. I'll sometimes have meetings with individual staff members, because one of my roles is for probationary staff. I do observations of probationary staff. So I have to go in and do observations. Oftentimes, you know, I'll have meetings most of the day. They could be Zoom, they could be in person. I could be out in the schools, I could be out in the community, I could be in Augusta, because legislation is another big part of my job, and trying to keep an eye on the horizon of what's happening so that I can inform and advise the school committee, because that is another one of my roles, is to inform and advise, to let them know what's happening, because they're not full-time people, they're volunteers, and so I have to give them the information that they need to make really good decisions, and so that's a big part of what I do too.
You just used a term that maybe viewers aren't familiar with, but probationary for a teacher.
Yeah.
What would that mean?
Probationary teachers, so when we hire teachers for the first time here in Gorham, they're on a probationary contract for the first 2 years. If they are successful in those first 2 years, then they're given in the third year what's called a continuing contract. It's not tenure. I've heard that word blown. That's not, no. It's what's called a continuing contract, which means that the contract is issued, and unless something disrupts it, it's just automatically continuing, right? So that's the difference. So a probationary teacher is somebody that's been in the system for 2 years or less. Yep.
Got it.
Yep.
And then a little bit more about how maybe you could share how you came to Gorham, why you came to Gorham, and then in general, how a superintendent is chosen to be the CEO of the school district.
That is no small task, and I cannot overemphasize enough the responsibility of the school committee to do that task, which is to hire a superintendent. That is a big deal. That's like, besides policy, that's probably the second biggest thing that they do, is hiring a superintendent. And it's got to be the right match. Not every superintendent is right for each individual community. Now, I will tell you that I'm originally from Washington County in the Machias area. And I always wanted to be in the southern part of the state, because, you know, being from Washington County, that's where you think all the action is, right? And so I slowly, over my career, worked towards the southern part of the state. And so when I saw the opening in Gorham, I was in RSU 3, which is in Unity and Thorndike area.
Yep.
And I'd been a superintendent for 9 years at that point in time, and just saw this as a great opportunity. And when I came to visit Gorham for the first time, and it's a multi-step process. It's not, there's like 3 interviews and public forums and the whole 9 yards. It's not like a one and done interview process. So when I came for the first time to the community of Gorham, I remember it was at night. I remember it was right around that 5:30 time frame, and I was coming into Gorham. So I first saw the traffic. I first saw the traffic, and I got that firsthand, like, wow, that's interesting.
Well, if you could get beyond that and still take the job.
But well, here's what did it for me. Ready? So I had gone into, I think it was Burger King, to just park and sit and kind of get my thoughts together for a moment. And then I was coming out of Burger King, and of course at that time of night it's just bumper to bumper traffic, right? But the person that's there stopped, let me out. Just as they do, like if you go downtown at night, you'll see that happening all the time, right? It's a courtesy that people do. It reminded me of home. It reminded me of the rural parts of the state where everybody knows one another and they're working together as a great community. And you could see that just in that little thing right there. I could say, oh, I can tell Gorham's a great community, because people in Gorham do that sort of thing for one another. without asking, without anybody beeping their horn or anything like that. That was just one little example in the first 10 minutes that I was here in the community. I thought, this is the place for me. And then, of course, throughout the course of those rest of those interviews, first round, second round, public forum, it just became more and more clear to me that my beliefs aligned with the community of Gorham, and that Gorham's community beliefs aligned with mine. And so I knew it was a good match. And then luckily they made the decision to hire me. And I've been here 9 years now. So
That's hard to believe.
yeah,
Yes.
it is. Yeah.
I remember your interview process, because there's always an interview selection committee,
Yes.
is what it's called, which is made up of usually administrators, staff, community members, and then there's opportunity for parents, teachers, staff to meet you and to get a sense of who you are. And it's a very open process and inclusive process, I would say.
And I think it's one of the most important ones that a community can undertake.
Yes.
Again, the school committee sort of leads that process, and that's their responsibility, but engaging the community as a whole in that. Because, public schools are such a core component of every community.
Right.
So much back and forth between the public schools and the community, whether it's, us, the community serving us and helping us out, or us doing more for the community. I think that there's such a back and forth and a symbiotic relationship there that has to be there in order for it to work well. And we definitely have that here in Gorham. So,
Great.
Yeah. One of the things that I haven't had a chance to mention that I wanted to is it comes from last we had a little difficulty with the budget. Remember last year?
Yes.
Yeah, that's okay. I think that was a good thing for our community, because we needed to have some of those really hard conversations about what are our priorities. And I think that really went very, very well, and ultimately we came to where we needed to be with that, which is beautiful. I think that's democracy in action right there. But one of the sort of misconceptions that I heard during that time was sort of the role and responsibility of the school committee versus the town council versus where the school committee sort of sits in that whole thing. And I guess I did want to make sure to clarify that, the responsibility of the school committee, when they're elected, I talked to you about the fact that they become sort of state agents at that point in time. They're no longer a locally elected board. Once you're elected to a school committee, you then become a state agency that actually literally falls under the supervision of the Commissioner of Education, believe it or not. So that's a state level process, because it's education, and education is a state level responsibility. And so when that happens and a school committee a member is elected, they become that state level official, and their constituency is no longer the taxpayer of Gorham. Their constituency becomes the children of Gorham. So it's a different perspective that's important to understand. And it's different than town council. Town council's constituency is the taxpayer of Gorham. So, and that's what their role and responsibility is supposed to be, and what they need to do. But when you are elected to the school committee, your constituency becomes those children, and you have to make decisions based on what you believe is in the best interest of children. Now those things come together, and in Gorham, because we're a municipal school system, our sort of legislative body that controls the purse strings, the budget overall, is the town council.
Right.
And so they have to come together. So we're not, even though we have a different constituency, we don't operate in a vacuum. We know that whatever we bring forward has to come and mesh with the needs of the town as a whole. And so that's that process that occurs when the school committee brings a budget forward to the town council reviews it, asks questions. That's that very important process that occurs. And then when the town council approves of that budget, they're basically saying, this is a budget that we know can mesh with the needs of the town as a whole. And then they ask the taxpayers, do you agree? Is what the referendum is, really. So the referendum is, do you agree with the decision that the town council made? And so that's sort of how that all works. But the school committee is a separate state agency almost. It is, even though we're a municipal school system, we do not fall underneath of the town. It's just a little bit different that way.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And that was a challenging situation.
It was.
For the community, for the school department, for the town. When you have a situation, that's one example, but there are others that come up. How best does the superintendent and the school committee address challenges and difficult situations that might arise? Yeah,
communication, transparency. I would say also that listening skill that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
and the ability to take that listening skill and to utilize it in ways that it's like civil discourse and compromise, right? Listen for the things that are common, the things that we can take action on, and find ways to compromise and move forward. And I think, to be honest with you, I thought that even though it was painful to go through a little bit, but it was necessary and was a good outcome because it was a compromise. It really was that civil discourse. Here are the things that we're thinking need to change. Here are the things that we need to have basically for the schools to continue to operate. Where does that all come together, and where does that compromise occur? And that process was that. And it was wonderful. I thought it was a great example for the most part. I didn't really pay a lot of attention to social media, so maybe I'm not looking at that part, I guess. But the public meetings, the discourse with the town council and the school committee, very, very good examples of democracy in action, which is, these are difficult times. Share your thoughts, share your beliefs, share your reasons, and then let's find a path forward together. And that's what happened. And again, I think that's just a great example of Gorham as a community.
Right.
Yep.
Yep. Communication and compromise.
Yes.
They go a long way.
They do. They do. Yeah.
We talked about how things are structured with the school committee and the superintendent.
Yep.
That structure has been in place for a long, long, long time.
Yeah.
How does that contribute to providing a well-rounded, solid education, and really watching out for our students, for our kids?
Yeah. I think, between the elections for school committee members, between the public posting and meetings and the transparency and the discourse that occurs for decision making, and all of those things combined, I think ensures that a school committee listens to the community and to the children and what their needs are, and is able to identify what are those needs and then translate that into budget or translate that into policy and then move forward with that. And the whole system is structured so that no one piece, it's the balance of power that we talk about.
It's checks and balances.
It's checks and balances, right? No one piece can do everything on its own. I mean, I can't certainly control everything. My boss is the school committee. School committee has to be elected. Their boss is the elected, is the community, right? And the children that they serve. So it's really that checks and balances, only at a very local level. Yeah, I like that way to put it. That's a really great example. Yep. I think that it's really, the governance of schools is really about that representation and that ability to listen and to take the information that you're hearing for the needs of the community and translate it into the action. And that's what governance is all about. It's about participation too. None of this, and I think this was a prime example last year too, with the budget going down the first time. I think there was a certain sense of, the budget's always passed, it's gonna pass. I don't need to go out and vote. Well, no, you need to participate, right?
Right.
Civil discourse, civil participation is all about that. It's about doing, it's about going to the polls, it's about going to the public meetings, it's about participating in the community and civic engagement. And I think that the structures support that, and then it's up to the community to participate, really, at the end of the day. And so everything is there for that to take place. Gorham is an incredible community when it comes to that, and we really do have great participation when we need it, and I think that that's going to continue as well. But the structure is there for a reason, and I think it works. I think it works really well.
Yes, yes, and you're right. I think Gorham values the quality of the schools here, the high quality of the schools, and ultimately it's doing what's best for all our kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
And greater society many years down the road.
Right, because that's an investment in the future, right? Yeah, I think Gorham understands that very, very clearly. Yeah.
Agreed.
Good. Well, thank you, Kathy, for your time and
you're
energy and your experiences as a school committee member as well. You told a couple of good stories there, and I just really appreciate you being here today and
My
helping.
pleasure. It was fun to relive the school committee days, and
Would you do it again?
maybe.
I'm not asking you to do it again. I'm just wondering if you would do it again.
Oh, I would do it again.
Okay,
yes,
all right,
yes,
good.
yes.
All right, well, that's good to know. Thank you, Kathy, so much for your service and time.
You're so welcome, Heather.
All right.
Thank you.